Chapter 13 of Eve and David by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 13. Just at that moment, David appeared, as if by magic, in the Place du Murier. This was how it had come about. He felt that he was in a rather difficult position. His wife insisted that Lucien must neither go to David nor know of his hiding place. And Lucien, all the while, was writing the most affectionate letters, saying that in a few days' time all should be set right, and even as Basine Clerget explained the reason why the band played, she put 2 letters into his hands. The first was from Eve. "Dearest," she wrote, "do as if Lucien were not here. Do not trouble yourself in the least. Our whole security depends upon the fact that your enemies cannot find you. Get that idea firmly into your head. I have more confidence in Kolb and Marion and Basine than in my own brother. Such is my misfortune. Alas, poor Lucien is not the ingenuous and tender-hearted poet whom we used to know, and it is simply because he is trying to interfere on your behalf, and because he imagines that he can discharge our debts, and this from pride, my David, that I am afraid of him. Some fine clothes have been sent from Paris for him, and 5 gold pieces in a pretty purse. He gave the money to me, and we are living on it. We have one enemy the less. Your father has gone, thanks to Petit Claud. Petit Claud unraveled his designs and put an end to them at once by telling him that you would do nothing without consulting him, and that he, Petit Claud, would not allow you to concede a single point in the matter of the invention until you had been promised an indemnity of 30,000 francs, 15,000 to free you from embarrassment, and 15,000 more to be yours in any case, whether your invention succeeds or no. I cannot understand Petit Claud. I embrace you, dear, a wife's kiss for her husband in trouble. Our little Lucien is well. How strange it is to watch him grow rosy and strong, like a flower, in these stormy days. Mother prays God for you now, as always, and sends love only less tender than mine. Your Eve." As a matter of fact, Petit Claud and the Cointets had taken fright at old Sechard's peasant shrewdness, and got rid of him so much the more easily because it was now vintage time at Marsac. Eve's letter enclosed another from Lucien. My dear David, everything is going well. I am armed cap a pie. Today I open the campaign, and in 48 hours I shall have made great progress. How glad I shall be to embrace you when you are free again and my debts are all paid. My mother and sister persist in mistrusting me. Their suspicion wounds me to the quick. As if I did not know already that you are hiding with Basine, for every time that Basine comes to the house I hear news of you and receive answers to my letters. And besides, it is plain that my sister could not find any one else to trust. It hurts me cruelly to think that I shall be so near you today, and yet that you will not be present at this banquet in my honor. I owe my little triumph to the vainglory of Angouleme. In a few days it will be quite forgotten, and you alone would have taken a real pleasure in it. But, after all, in a little while you will pardon everything to one who counts it more than all the triumphs in the world to be your brother, Lucien. 2 forces tugged sharply at David's heart. He adored his wife, and if he held Lucien in somewhat less esteem, his friendship was scarcely diminished. In solitude our feelings have unrestricted play, and a man preoccupied, like David, with all-absorbing thoughts, will give way to impulses for which ordinary life would have provided a sufficient counterpoise. As he read Lucien's letter to the sound of military music, and heard of this unlooked-for recognition, he was deeply touched by that expression of regret. He had known how it would be. A very slight expression of feeling appeals irresistibly to a sensitive soul, for they are apt to credit others with like depths. How should the drop fall unless the cup were full to the brim? So, at midnight, in spite of all Bazine's entreaties, David must go to see Lucien. "Nobody will be out in the streets at this time of night," he said. "I shall not be seen, and they cannot arrest me. Even if I should meet people, I can make use of Kolb's way of going into hiding. And besides, it is so intolerably long since I saw my wife and child." The reasoning was plausible enough. Basine gave way, and David went. Petit Claud was just taking leave as he came up, and at his cry of "Lucien," the two brothers flung their arms about each other with tears in their eyes. Life holds not many moments such as these. Lucien's heart went out in response to this friendship for its own sake. There was never question of debtor and creditor between them, and the offender met with no reproaches save his own. David, generous and noble that he was longing to bestow pardon. He meant, first of all, to read Lucien a lecture and scatter the clouds that overspread the love of the brother and sister. And with these ends in view, the lack of money and its consequent dangers disappeared entirely from his mind. "Go home," said Petit Claud, addressing his client. "Take advantage of your imprudence to see your wife and child again, at any rate, and you must not be seen, mind you." "How unlucky," he added when he was alone in the Place du Murier. "If only Cerizet were here!" The buildings magniloquently styled the Angouleme Law Courts were then in process of construction. Petit Claud muttered these words to himself as he passed by the hoardings, and heard a tap upon the boards, and a voice issuing from a crack between two planks. "Here I am," said Cerizet. "I saw David coming out of L'Houmeau. I was beginning to have my suspicions about his retreat, and now I am sure, and I know where to have him. But I want to know something of Lucien's plans before I set the snare for David, and here are you sending him into the house. Find some excuse for stopping here at least, and when David and Lucien come out, send them round this way. They will think they are quite alone, and I shall overhear their goodbye." "You are a very devil," muttered Petit Claud. "Well, I'm blessed if a man wouldn't do anything for the thing you promised me." Petit Claud walked away from the hoarding, and paced up and down in the Place du Murier. He watched the windows of the room where the family sat together, and thought of his own prospects to keep up his courage. Cerizet's cleverness had given him the chance of striking the final blow. Petit Claud was a double dealer of the profoundly cautious stamp that is never caught by the bait of a present satisfaction, nor entangled by a personal attachment, after his first initiation into the strategy of self-seeking and the instability of the human heart. So, from the very first, he had put little trust in Cointet. He foresaw that his marriage negotiations might very easily be broken off, saw also that in that case he could not accuse Cointet of bad faith, and he had taken his measures accordingly. But since his success at the Hotel de Bargeton, Petit Claud's game was above board. A certain underplot of his was useless now, and even dangerous to a man with his political ambitions. He had laid the foundations of his future importance in the following manner. Gannerac and a few of the wealthy men of business in L'Houmeau formed a sort of liberal clique in constant communication through commercial channels with the leaders of the opposition. The Villele ministry, accepted by the dying Louis XVIII., gave the signal for a change of tactics in the opposition camp. For since the death of Napoleon, the Liberals had ceased to resort to the dangerous expedient of conspiracy. They were busy organizing resistance by lawful means throughout the provinces, and aiming at securing control of the great bulk of electors by convincing the masses. Petit Claud, a rabid Liberal and a man of L'Houmeau, was the instigator, the secret counsellor, and the very life of this movement in the lower town, which groaned under the tyranny of the aristocrats at the upper end. He was the first to see the danger of leaving the whole press of the department in the control of the Cointets. The opposition must have its organ; it would not do to be behind other cities. If each one of us gives Gannerac a bill for 500 francs, he would have some 20,000 francs and more. We might buy up Sechard's printing office, and we could do as we liked with the master printer if we lent him the capital, Petit Claud had said. Others had taken up the idea, and in this way Petit Claud strengthened his position with regard to David on the one side and the Cointets on the other. Casting about him for a tool for his party, he naturally thought that a rogue of Cerizet's calibre was the very man for the purpose. "If you can find Sechard's hiding place and put him in our hands, somebody will lend you 20,000 francs to buy his business, and very likely there will be a newspaper to print. So set about it," he had said. Petit Claud put more faith in Cerizet's activity than in all the Doublons in existence. And then it was that he promised Cointet that Sechard should be arrested. But now that the little lawyer cherished hopes of office, he saw that he must turn his back upon the Liberals, and meanwhile the amount for the printing office had been subscribed in L'Houmeau. Petit Claud decided to allow things to take their natural course. "Pooh!" he thought, "Cerizet will get into trouble with his paper, and give me an opportunity of displaying my talents." He walked up to the door of the printing office and spoke to Kolb, the sentinel. "Go up and warn David that he had better go now," he said, "and take every precaution. I am going home; it is 1 o'clock." Marion came to take Kolb's place. Lucien and David came down together and went out, Kolb 100 paces ahead of them, and Marion at the same distance behind. The two friends walked past the hoarding, Lucien talking eagerly the while. "My plan is extremely simple, David, but how could I tell you about it while Eve was there? She would never understand. I am quite sure that at the bottom of Louise's heart there is a feeling that I can rouse, and I should like to arouse it if it is only to avenge myself upon that idiot, the prefect. If our love affair only lasts for a week, I will contrive to send an application through her for the subvention of 20,000 francs for you. I am going to see her again to-morrow in the little boudoir where our old affair of the heart began. Petit Claud says that the room is the same as ever. I shall play my part in the comedy, and I will send word by Basine to-morrow morning to tell you whether the actor was hissed. You may be at liberty by then, who knows? Now do you understand how it was that I wanted clothes from Paris? One cannot act the lover's part in rags." At 6 o'clock that morning, Cerizet went to Petit Claud. "Doublon can be ready to take his man to-morrow at noon. I will answer for it," he said. "I know one of Mademoiselle Clerget's girls, do you understand?" Cerizet unfolded his plan, and Petit Claud hurried to find Cointet. "If Monsieur Francis du Hautoy will settle his property on Francoise, you shall sign a deed of partnership with Sechard in 2 days. I shall not be married for a week after the contract is signed, so we shall both be within the terms of our little agreement, tit for tat. To-night, however, we must keep a close watch over Lucien and Madame la Comtesse du Chatelet, for the whole business lies in that. If Lucien hopes to succeed through the Countess' influence, I have David safe." "You will be Keeper of the Seals yet, it is my belief," said Cointet. "And why not? No one objects to Monsieur de Peyronnet," said Petit Claud. He had not altogether sloughed his skin of Liberalism. Mademoiselle de la Haye's ambiguous position brought most of the upper town to the signing of the marriage contract. The comparative poverty of the young couple and the absence of a corbeille quickened the interest that people love to exhibit, for it is with beneficence as with ovations. We prefer the deeds of charity which gratify self-love. The Marquise de Pimentel, the Comtesse du Châtelet, Monsieur de Senonches, and one or two frequenters of the house had given Francoise a few wedding presents, which made great talk in the city. These pretty trifles, together with the trousseau which Zephirine had been preparing for the past 12 months, the godfather's jewels, and the usual wedding gifts, consoled Francoise and roused the curiosity of some mothers of daughters. Petit Claud and Cointet had both remarked that their presence in the Angouleme Olympus was endured rather than courted. Cointet was Francoise's trustee and quasi-guardian, and if Petit Claud was to sign the contract, Petit Claud's presence was as necessary as the attendance of the man to be hanged at an execution. But though once married, Madame Petit Claud might keep her right of entry to her godmother's house. Petit Claud foresaw some difficulty on his own account, and resolved to be beforehand with these haughty personages. He felt ashamed of his parents. He had sent his mother to stay at Mansle. Now he begged her to say that she was out of health, and to give her consent in writing. So humiliating was it to be without relations, protectors, or witnesses to his signature, that Petit Claud thought himself in luck that he could bring a presentable friend at the Countess' request. He called to take up Lucien, and they drove to the Hôtel de Bargeton. On that memorable evening, the poet dressed to outshine every man present. Madame de Senonches had spoken of him as the hero of the hour, and a first interview between two estranged lovers is the kind of scene that provincials particularly love. Lucien had come to be the lion of the evening. He was said to be so handsome, so much changed, so wonderful, that every well-born woman in Angouleme was curious to see him again. Following the fashion of the transition period between the 18th century small clothes and the vulgar costume of the present day, he wore tight-fitting black trousers. Men still showed their figures in those days, to the utter despair of lean, clumsily made mortals, and Lucien was an Apollo. The open-work grey silk stockings, the neat shoes, and the black satin waistcoat were scrupulously drawn over his person and seemed to cling to him. His forehead looked the whiter by contrast with the thick, bright curls that rose above it with studied grace. The proud eyes were radiant. The hands, small as a woman's, never showed to better advantage than when gloved. He had modelled himself upon de Marsay, the famous Parisian dandy, holding his hat and cane in one hand and keeping the other free for the very occasional gestures which illustrated his talk. Lucien had quite intended to emulate the famous false modesty of those who bend their heads to pass beneath the Porte Saint Denis and to slip unobserved into the room. But Petit Claud, having but one friend, made him useful. He brought Lucien almost pompously through a crowded room to Madame de Senonches. The poet heard a murmur as he passed. Not so very long ago that hum of voices would have turned his head. To-day he was quite different. He did not doubt that he himself was greater than the whole Olympus put together. "Madame," he said, addressing Madame de Senonches, "I have already congratulated my friend Petit Claud, a man with the stuff in him of which keepers of the seals are made, on the honor of his approaching connection with you, slight as are the ties between godmother and goddaughter." This with the air of a man uttering an epigram, by no means lost upon any woman in the room, for every woman was listening, without appearing to do so. "And as for myself," he continued, "I am delighted to have the opportunity of paying my homage to you." He spoke easily and fluently, as some great lord might speak under the roof of his inferiors. And as he listened to Zephirine's involved reply, he cast a glance over the room to consider the effect that he wished to make. The pause gave him time to discover Francis du Hautoy and the prefect, to bow gracefully to each, with the proper shade of difference in his smile, and finally to approach Madame du Châtelet as if he had just caught sight of her. That meeting was the real event of the evening. No one so much as thought of the marriage contract lying in the adjoining bedroom, whither Francoise and the notary led guest after guest to sign the document. Lucien made a step towards Louise de Negrepelisse, and then spoke with that grace of manner now associated, for her, with memories of Paris. "Do I owe to you, madame, the pleasure of an invitation to dine at the prefecture the day after to-morrow?" he said. "You owe it solely to your fame, monsieur," Louise answered dryly, somewhat taken aback by the turn of phrase by which Lucien deliberately tried to wound her pride. "Ah, Madame la Comtesse, I cannot bring you the guest if the man is in disgrace," said Lucien, and without waiting for an answer, he turned and greeted the Bishop with stately grace. "Your lordship's prophecy has been partially fulfilled," he said, and there was a winning charm in his tones. "I will endeavor to fulfill it to the letter. I consider myself very fortunate, since this evening brings me an opportunity of paying my respects to you." Lucien drew the Bishop into a conversation that lasted for 10 minutes. The women looked on Lucien as a phenomenon. His unexpected insolence had struck Madame du Châtelet dumb; she could not find an answer. Looking round the room, she saw that every woman admired Lucien. She watched group after group repeating the phrases by which Lucien crushed her with seeming disdain, and her heart contracted with a spasm of mortification. Suppose that he should not come to the prefecture after this, what talk there would be, she thought. Where did he learn this pride? Can Mademoiselle des Touches have taken a fancy for him? He is so handsome. They say that she hurried to see him in Paris the day after that actress died. Perhaps he has come to the rescue of his brother-in-law, and happened to be behind our caleche at Mansle by accident. Lucien looked at us very strangely that morning." A crowd of thoughts crossed Louise's brain, and unluckily for her, she continued to ponder visibly as she watched Lucien. He was talking with the Bishop as if he were the king of the room, making no effort to find any one out, waiting till others came to him, looking round about him with varying expression, and as much at his ease as his model de Marsay. Monsieur de Senonches appeared at no great distance, but Lucien still stood beside the prelate. At the end of 10 minutes Louise could contain herself no longer. She rose and went over to the Bishop and said, "What is being said, my lord, that you smile so often?" Lucien drew back discreetly, and left Madame du Châtelet with his lordship. "Ah, Madame la Comtesse, what a clever young fellow he is! He was explaining to me that he owed all he is to you." "I am not ungrateful, madame," said Lucien, with a reproachful glance that charmed the Countess. "Let us have an understanding," she said, beckoning him with her fan. "Come into the boudoir. My Lord Bishop, you shall judge between us." "She has found a funny task for his lordship," said one of the Chandour camp, sufficiently audibly. "Judge between us?" repeated Lucien, looking from the prelate to the lady. "Then is one of us in fault?" Louise de Negrepelisse sat down on the sofa in the familiar boudoir. She made the Bishop sit on one side and Lucien on the other, then she began to speak. But Lucien, to the joy and surprise of his old love, honored her with inattention. Her words fell unheeded on his ears. He sat like Pasta in Tancredi, with the words O Patria upon her lips. The music of the great cavatina del Rizzo might have passed into his face. Indeed, Coralie's pupil had contrived to bring the tears to his eyes. "Oh, Louise, how I loved you!" he murmured, careless of the bishop's presence, heedless of the conversation, as soon as he knew that the Countess had seen the tears. "Dry your eyes, or you will ruin me here a second time," she said in an aside that horrified the prelate. "And once is enough," was Lucien's quick retort. "That speech from Madame d'Espard's cousin would dry the eyes of a weeping Magdalen. Oh me! For a little moment old memories and lost illusions and my 20th year came back to me. And you have—" His lordship hastily retreated to the drawing-room at this. It seemed to him that his dignity was like to be compromised by this sentimental pair. Every one ostentatiously refrained from interrupting them, and a quarter of an hour went by, till at last Sixte du Chatelet, vexed by the laughter and talk and excursions to the boudoir door, went in with a countenance distinctly overclouded, and found Louise and Lucien talking excitedly. "Madame," said Sixte in his wife's ear, "you know Angouleme better than I do, and surely you should think of your position as Madame la Prefete and of the Government." "My dear," said Louise, scanning her responsible editor with a haughtiness that made him quake, "I am talking with Monsieur de Rubempre of matters which interest you. It is a question of rescuing an inventor about to fall a victim to the basest machinations. You will help us. As to those ladies yonder and their opinion of me, you shall see how I will freeze the venom of their tongues." She came out of the boudoir on Lucien's arm, and drew him across to sign the contract with a great lady's audacity. "Write your name after mine," she said, handing him the pen, and Lucien submissively signed in the place indicated beneath her name. "Monsieur de Senonches, would you have recognized Monsieur de Rubempre?" she continued, and the insolent sportsman was compelled to greet Lucien. She returned to the drawing-room on Lucien's arm, and seated him on the awe-inspiring central sofa between herself and Zephirine. There, enthroned like a queen, she began, at first in a low voice, a conversation in which epigram evidently was not wanting. Some of her old friends, and several women who paid court to her, came to join the group, and Lucien soon became the hero of the circle. The Countess drew him out on the subject of life in Paris. His satirical talk flowed with spontaneous and incredible spirit. He told anecdotes of celebrities, those conversational luxuries which the provincial devours with such avidity. His wit was as much admired as his good looks. And Madame la Comtesse Sixte du Chatelet, preparing Lucien's triumph so patiently, sat like a player enraptured with the sound of his instrument. She gave him opportunities for a reply. She looked round the circle for applause so openly that not a few of the women began to think that their return together was something more than a coincidence, and that Lucien and Louise, loving with all their hearts, had been separated by a double treason. Pique, very likely, had brought about this ill-starred match with Chatelet, and a reaction set in against the prefect. Before the Countess rose to go at 1 o'clock in the morning, she turned to Lucien and said in a low voice, "Do me the pleasure of coming punctually to-morrow evening." Then, with the friendliest little nod, she went, saying a few words to Chatelet, who was looking for his hat. "If Madame du Chatelet has given me a correct idea of the state of affairs, count on me, my dear Lucien," said the prefect, preparing to hurry after his wife. She was going away without him after the Paris fashion. "Your brother-in-law may consider that his troubles are at an end," he added as he went. "Monsieur le Comte surely owes me so much," smiled Lucien. Cointet and Petit Claud heard these farewell speeches. "Well, well, we are done for now," Cointet muttered in his confederate's ear. Petit Claud, thunderstruck by Lucien's success, amazed by his brilliant wit and varying charm, was gazing at Francoise de la Haye. The girl's whole face was full of admiration for Lucien. "Be like your friend," she seemed to say to her betrothed. A gleam of joy flitted over Petit Claud's countenance. "We still have a whole day before the prefect's dinner. I will answer for everything." End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Evan David by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 14. An hour later, as Petit Claud and Lucien walked home together, Lucien talked of his success. "Well, my dear fellow, I came, I saw, I conquered. Sechard will be very happy in a few hours' time." "Just what I wanted to know," thought Petit Claud. Aloud he said, "I thought you were simply a poet, Lucien, but you are a Lauzun too, that is to say, twice a poet." And they shook hands, for the last time, as it proved. "Good news, dear Eve," said Lucien, waking his sister. "David will have no debts in less than a month." "How is that?" "Well, my Louise is still hidden by Madame du Châtelet's petticoat. She loves me more than ever. She will send a favorable report of our discovery to the Minister of the Interior through her husband. So we have only to endure our troubles for 1 month, while I avenge myself on the prefect and complete the happiness of his married life." Eve listened and thought that she must be dreaming. "I saw the little gray drawing room where I trembled like a child 2 years ago. It seemed as if scales fell from my eyes when I saw the furniture and the pictures and the faces again. How Paris changes one's ideas!" "Is that a good thing?" asked Eve, at last beginning to understand. "Come, come, you are still asleep. We will talk about it tomorrow after breakfast." Cerizet's plot was exceedingly simple, a commonplace stratagem familiar to the provincial bailiff. Its success entirely depends upon circumstances, and in this case it was certain, so intimate was Cerizet's knowledge of the characters and hopes of those concerned. Cerizet had been a kind of Don Juan among the young work girls, ruling his victims by playing one off against another. Since he had been the Cointet's extra foreman, he had singled out one of Basine Clerget's assistants, a girl almost as handsome as Madame Sechard. Henriette Signol's parents owned a small vineyard 2 leagues out of Angoulême, on the road to Saintes. The Signols, like everybody else in the country, could not afford to keep their only child at home, so they meant her to go out to service, in country phrase. The art of clear starching is a part of every country housemaid's training, and so great was Madame Bruyère's reputation that the Signols sent Henriette to her as apprentice, and paid for their daughter's board and lodging. Madame Bruyère was one of the old-fashioned mistresses who consider that they fill a parent's place towards their apprentices. They were part of the family; she took them with her to church and looked scrupulously after them. Henriette Signol was a tall, fine-looking girl, with bold eyes and long, thick, dark hair, and the pale, very fair complexion of girls in the South, white as a magnolia flower. For which reasons Henriette was one of the first on whom Cerizet cast his eyes. But Henriette came of honest farmer folk, and only yielded, at last, to jealousy, to bad example, and the treacherous promise of subsequent marriage. By this time Cerizet was the Cointet's foreman. When he learned that the Signols owned a vineyard worth some 10 or 12,000 francs, and a tolerably comfortable cottage, he hastened to make it impossible for Henriette to marry any one else. Affairs had reached this point when Petit Claud held out the prospect of a printing office and 20,000 francs of borrowed capital, which was to prove a yoke upon the borrower's neck. Cerizet was dazzled; the offer turned his head. Henriette Signol was now only an obstacle in the way of his ambitions, and he neglected the poor girl. Henriette, in her despair, clung more closely to her seducer as he tried to shake her off. When Cerizet began to suspect that David was hiding in Basine's house, his views with regard to Henriette underwent another change, though he treated her as before. A kind of frenzy works in a girl's brain when she must marry her seducer to conceal her dishonor, and Cerizet was on the watch to turn this madness to his own account. During the morning of the day when Lucien had set himself to reconquer his Louise, Cerizet told Basine's secret to Henriette, giving her to understand at the same time that their marriage and future prospects depended upon the discovery of David's hiding place. Thus instructed, Henriette easily made certain of the fact that David was in Basine Clerget's inner room. It never occurred to the girl that she was doing wrong to act the spy, and Cerizet involved her in the guilt of betrayal by this first step. Lucien was still sleeping while Cerizet, closeted with Petit Claud, heard the history of the important trifles with which all Angouleme presently would ring. The Cointet's foreman gave a satisfied nod as Petit Claud came to an end. "Lucien surely has written you a line since he came back, has he not?" he asked. "This is all I have," answered the lawyer, and he held out a note on Madame Sechard's writing paper. "Very well," said Cerizet. "Let Doublon be in wait at the Palais Gate about 10 minutes before sunset. Tell him to post his gendarmes, and you shall have our man." "Are you sure of your part of the business?" asked Petit Claud, scanning Cerizet. "I rely on chance," said the ex-street boy, "and she is a saucy hussy. She does not like honest folk." "You must succeed," the lawyer said dryly. "I shall succeed," said Cerizet. "You have pushed me into this dirty business; you may as well let me have a few banknotes to wipe off the stains." Then, detecting a look that he did not like in the attorney's face, he continued with a deadly glance: "If you have cheated me, sir, if you don't buy the printing office for me within a week, you will leave a young widow." He lowered his voice. "If we have David on the jail register at 6 o'clock, come round to Monsieur Gannerac's at 9, and we will settle your business," said Petit Claud peremptorily. "Agreed. Your will shall be done, Governor," said Cerizet. Cerizet understood the art of washing paper, a dangerous art for the Treasury. He washed out Lucien's 4 lines and replaced them, imitating the handwriting with a dexterity which augured ill for his own future. "My dear David, your business is settled. You need not fear to go to the prefect. You can go out at sunset. I will come to meet you and tell you what to do at the prefecture. Your brother, Lucien." At noon, Lucien wrote to David, telling him of his evening's success. The prefect would be sure to lend his influence, he said. He was full of enthusiasm over the invention, and was drawing up a report that very day to send to the government. Marion carried the letter to Basine, taking some of Lucien's linen to the laundry as a pretext for the errand. Petit Claud had told Cerizet that a letter would in all probability be sent. Cerizet called for Mademoiselle Signol, and the two walked by the Charente. Henriette's integrity must have held out for a long while, for the walk lasted for 2 hours. A whole future of happiness and ease and the interests of a child were at stake, and Cerizet asked a mere trifle of her. He was very careful, besides, to say nothing of the consequences of that trifle. She was only to carry a letter and a message, that was all. But it was the greatness of the reward for the trifling service that frightened Henriette. Nevertheless, Cerizet gained her consent at last. She would help him in his stratagem. At 5 o'clock Henriette must go out and come in again, telling Basine Clerget that Madame Sechard wanted to speak to her at once. 15 minutes after Basine's departure, she must go upstairs, knock at the door of the inner room, and give David the forged note. That was all. Cerizet looked to chance to manage the rest. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Ève and David by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ella Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 15. For the first time in 12 months, Ève felt the iron grasp of necessity relax a little. She began at last to hope. She too would enjoy her brother's visit. She would show herself abroad on the arm of a man feted in his native town, adored by the women, beloved by the proud Comtesse du Châtelet. She dressed herself prettily, and proposed to walk out after dinner with her brother to Beaulieu. In September all Angoulême comes out at that hour to breathe the fresh air. "Oh, that is the beautiful Madame Sechard," voices said here and there. "I should never have believed it of her," said a woman. "The husband is in hiding, and the wife walks abroad," said Madame Postel, for young Madame Sechard's benefit. "Oh, let us go home," said poor Ève. "I have made a mistake." A few minutes before sunset, the sound of a crowd rose from the steps that lead down to L'Houmeau. Apparently some crime had been committed, for persons coming from L'Houmeau were talking among themselves. Curiosity drew Lucien and Ève towards the steps. "A thief has just been arrested, no doubt. The man looks as pale as death," one of these passers by said to the brother and sister. The crowd grew larger. Lucien and Ève watched a group of some 30 children, old women, and men, returning from work, clustering about the gendarmes, whose gold-laced caps gleamed above the heads of the rest. About 100 persons followed the procession, the crowd gathering like a storm cloud. "Oh, it is my husband!" Ève cried out. "David!" exclaimed Lucien. "It is his wife," said voices, and the crowd made way. "What made you come out?" asked Lucien. "Your letter," said David, haggard and white. "I knew it," said Ève, and she fainted away. Lucien raised his sister, and with the help of 2 strangers he carried her home. Marion laid her in bed, and Kolb rushed off for a doctor. Ève was still insensible when the doctor arrived, and Lucien was obliged to confess to his mother that he was the cause of David's arrest, for he, of course, knew nothing of the forged letter and Cerizet's stratagem. Then he went up to his room and locked himself in, struck dumb by the malediction in his mother's eyes. In the dead of night he wrote one more letter amid constant interruptions. The reader can divine the agony of the writer's mind from those phrases jerked out, as it were, one by one. My beloved sister, we have seen each other for the last time. My resolution is final, and for this reason. In many families there is one unlucky member, a kind of disease in their midst. I am that unlucky one in our family. The observation is not mine. It was made at a friendly supper one evening at the Rocher de Cancale by a diplomate who has seen a great deal of the world. While we laughed and joked, he explained the reason why some young lady or some other remained unmarried to the astonishment of the world. It was a touch of her father, he said, and with that he unfolded his theory of inherited weaknesses. He told us how such and such a family would have flourished but for the mother, how it was that a son had ruined his father, or a father had stripped his children of prospects and respectability. It was said laughingly, but we thought of so many cases in point in 10 minutes that I was struck with the theory. The amount of truth in it furnished all sorts of wild paradoxes, which journalists maintain cleverly enough for their own amusement when there is nobody else at hand to mystify. I bring bad luck to our family. My heart is full of love for you, yet I behave like an enemy. The blow dealt unintentionally is the cruelest blow of all. While I was leading a bohemian life in Paris, a life made up of pleasure and misery, taking good fellowship for friendship, forsaking my true friends for those who wished to exploit me and succeeded, forgetful of you, or remembering you only to cause you trouble, all that while you were walking in the humble path of hard work, making your way slowly but surely to the fortune which I tried so madly to snatch. While you grew better, I grew worse. A fatal element entered into my life through my own choice. Yes, unbounded ambition makes an obscure existence simply impossible for me. I have tastes and remembrances of past pleasures that poison the enjoyments within my reach. Once I should have been satisfied with them. Now it is too late. Oh, dear Eve, no one can think more hardly of me than I do myself. My condemnation is absolute and pitiless. The struggle in Paris demands steady effort. My willpower is spasmodic. My brain works intermittently. The future is so appalling that I do not care to face it, and the present is intolerable. I wanted to see you again. I should have done better to stay in exile all my days. But exile without means of subsistence would be madness. I will not add another folly to the rest. Death is better than a maimed life. I cannot think of myself in any position in which my overweening vanity would not lead me into folly. Some human beings are like the figure 0. Another must be put before it, and they acquire 10 times their value. I am nothing unless a strong, inexorable will is wedded to mine. Madame de Bargeton was in truth my wife. When I refused to leave Coralie for her, I spoiled my life. You and David might have been excellent pilots for me, but you are not strong enough to tame my weakness, which in some sort eludes control. I like an easy life, a life without cares. To clear an obstacle out of my way, I can descend to baseness that sticks at nothing. I was born a prince. I have more than the requisite intellectual dexterity for success, but only by moments. And the prizes of a career so crowded by ambitious competitors are to those who expend no more than the necessary strength and retain a sufficient reserve when they reach the goal. I shall do harm again with the best intentions in the world. Some men are like oaks. I am a delicate shrub, it may be, and I, forsooth, must needs aspire to be a forest cedar. There you have my bankrupt's schedule. The disproportion between my powers and my desires, my want of balance, in short, will bring all my efforts to nothing. There are many such characters among men of letters, many men whose intellectual powers and character are always at variance, who will one thing and wish another. What would become of me? I can see it all beforehand, as I think of this and that great light that once shone on Paris, now utterly forgotten. On the threshold of old age I shall be a man older than my age, needy and without a name. My whole soul rises up against the thought of such a close. I will not be a social rag. Ah, dear sister, loved and worshipped at least as much for your severity at the last as for your tenderness at the first. If we have paid so dear for my joy at seeing you all once more, you and David may perhaps some day think that you could grudge no price, however high, for a little last happiness for an unhappy creature who loved you. Do not try to find me, Eve. Do not seek to know what becomes of me. My intellect, for once, shall be backed by my will. Renunciation, my angel, is daily death of self. My renunciation will only last for one day. I will take advantage now of that day. 2:00. Yes, I have quite made up my mind. Farewell forever, dear Eve. There is something sweet in the thought that I shall live only in your hearts henceforth, and I wish no other burying place. Once more, farewell. That is the last word from your brother, Lucien. Lucien read the letter over, crept noiselessly downstairs, and left it in the child's cradle. Amid falling tears, he set a last kiss on the forehead of his sleeping sister. Then he went out. He put out his candle in the grey dusk, took a last look at the old house, stole softly along the passage, and opened the street door. But in spite of his caution, he awakened Kolb, who slept on a mattress on the workshop floor. "Who goes there?" cried Kolb. "It is I, Lucien. I am going away, Kolb." "You would have done better if you had never come," Kolb muttered audibly. "I should have done better still if I had never come into the world," Lucien answered. "Good bye, Kolb. I don't bear you any grudge for thinking as I think myself. Tell David that I was sorry I could not bid him good bye, and say that this was my last thought." By the time the Alsatian was up and dressed, Lucien had shut the house door and was on his way towards the Charente by the Promenade de Beaulieu. He might have been going to a festival, for he had put on his new clothes from Paris and his dandy's trinkets for a drowning shroud. Something in Lucien's tone had struck Kolb. At first, the man thought of going to ask his mistress whether she knew that her brother had left the house; but as the deepest silence prevailed, he concluded that the departure had been arranged beforehand, and lay down again and slept. Little, considering the gravity of the question, has been written on the subject of suicide. It has not been studied. Perhaps it is a disease that cannot be observed. Suicide is one effect of a sentiment which we will call self-esteem, if you will, to prevent confusion by using the word honor. When a man despises himself and sees that others despise him, when real life fails to fulfill his hopes, then comes the moment when he takes his life, and thereby does homage to society. Shorn of his virtues or his splendor, he does not care to face his fellows. Among atheists, Christians being without the question of suicide, among atheists, whatever may be said to the contrary, none but a base coward can take up a dishonored life. There are three kinds of suicide. The first is only the last and acute stage of a long illness, and this kind belongs distinctly to pathology. The second is the suicide of despair, and the third, the suicide based on logical argument. Despair and deductive reasoning had brought Lucien to this pass, but both varieties are curable. It is only the pathological suicide that is inevitable. Not infrequently you find all three causes combined, as in the case of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Lucien, having made up his mind, fell to considering methods. The poet would fain die as became a poet. At first he thought of throwing himself into the Charente and making an end then and there, but as he came down the steps from Beaulieu for the last time, he heard the whole town talking of his suicide, he saw the horrid sight of a drowned dead body, and thought of the recognition and the inquest, and, like some other suicides, felt that vanity reached beyond death. He remembered the day spent at Courtois' mill, and his thoughts returned to the round pool among the willows that he saw as he came along by the little river, such a pool as you often find on small streams, with a still, smooth surface that conceals great depths beneath. The water is neither green, nor blue, nor white, nor tawny; It is like a polished steel mirror. No sword grass grows about the margin, there are no blue water forget-me-nots, nor broad lily leaves. The grass at the brim is short and thick, and the weeping willows that droop over the edge grow picturesquely enough. It is easy to imagine a sheer precipice beneath, filled with water to the brim. Any man who should have the courage to fill his pockets with pebbles would not fail to find death, and never be seen thereafter. At the time, while he admired the lovely miniature of a landscape, the poet had thought to himself, "'Tis a spot to make your mouth water for a noyade." He thought of it now as he went down into L'Houmeau, and when he took his way towards Marsac, with the last sombre thoughts gnawing at his heart, it was with the firm resolve to hide his death. There should be no inquest held over him, he would not be laid in earth, no one should see him in the hideous condition of the corpse that floats on the surface of the water. Before long he reached one of the slopes, common enough on all French highroads, and commonest of all between Angoulême and Poitiers. He saw the coach from Bordeaux to Paris coming up at full speed behind him, and knew that the passengers would probably alight to walk up the hill. He did not care to be seen just then. Turning off sharply into a beaten track, he began to pick the flowers in a vineyard hard by. When Lucien came back to the road with a great bunch of the yellow stone crop which grows everywhere upon the stony soil of the vineyards, he came out upon a traveller, dressed in black from head to foot. The stranger wore powder, there were silver buckles on his shoes of Orleans leather, and his brown face was scarred and seamed as if he had fallen into the fire in infancy. The traveller, so obviously clerical in his dress, was walking slowly and smoking a cigar. He turned as Lucien jumped down from the vineyard into the road. The deep melancholy on the handsome young face, the poet's symbolical flowers, and his elegant dress seemed to strike the stranger. He looked at Lucien with something of the expression of a hunter that has found his quarry at last, after long and fruitless search. He allowed Lucien to come alongside, in nautical phrase, then he slackened his pace, and appeared to look along the road up the hill. Lucien, following the direction of his eyes, saw a light travelling carriage with 2 horses and a post-boy standing beside it. "You have allowed the coach to pass you, monsieur. You will lose your place unless you care to take a seat in my caleche and overtake the mail, for it is rather quicker travelling post than by the public conveyance." The traveller spoke with extreme politeness and a very marked Spanish accent. Without waiting for an answer, he drew a cigar case from his pocket, opened it, and held it out to Lucien. "I am not on a journey," said Lucien, "and I am too near the end of my stage to indulge in the pleasure of smoking." "You are very severe with yourself," returned the Spaniard. "Though I am a canon of the Cathedral of Toledo, I occasionally smoke a cigarette. God gave us tobacco to allay our passions and our pains. You seem to be downcast, or, at any rate, you carry the symbolical flower of sorrow in your hand, like the rueful god Hymen. Come, all your troubles will vanish away with the smoke." And again the ecclesiastic held out his little straw case. There was something fascinating in his manner, and kindliness towards Lucien lighted up his eyes. "Forgive me, father," Lucien answered stiffly. "There is no cigar that can scatter my troubles." Tears came to his eyes at the words. "It must surely be divine providence that prompted me to take a little exercise to shake off a traveller's morning drowsiness," said the churchman. "A divine prompting to fulfil my mission here on earth by consoling you. What great trouble can you have at your age?" "Your consolations, father, can do nothing for me. You are a Spaniard, I am a Frenchman. You believe in the commandments of the Church, I am an atheist." "Santa Virgen del Pilar, you are an atheist!" cried the other, laying a hand on Lucien's arm with maternal solicitude. "Ah, here is one of the curious things I promised myself to see in Paris. We in Spain do not believe in atheists. There is no country but France where one can have such opinions at 19 years." "Oh, I am an atheist in the fullest sense of the word. I have no belief in God, in society, in happiness. Take a good look at me, father, for in a few hours' time life will be over for me. My last sun has risen," said Lucien. With a sort of rhetorical effect, he waved his hand towards the sky. "How so? What have you done that you must die? Who has condemned you to die?" "A tribunal from which there is no appeal. I myself." "You, child!" cried the priest. "Have you killed a man? Is the scaffold waiting for you? Let us reason together a little. If you are resolved, as you say, to return to nothingness, everything on earth is indifferent to you, is it not?" Lucien bowed assent. "Very well, then. Can you not tell me about your troubles? Some little affair of the heart has taken a bad turn, no doubt?" Lucien shrugged his shoulders very significantly. "Are you resolved to kill yourself to escape dishonor, or do you despair of life? Very good. You can kill yourself at Poitiers quite as easily as at Angouleme, and at Tours it will be no harder than at Poitiers. The quicksands of the Loire never give up their prey." "No, father," said Lucien, "I have settled it all. Not 3 weeks ago I chanced upon the most charming raft that can ferry a man sick and tired of this life into the other world." "The other world? You are not an atheist." "Oh, by another world I mean my next transformation, animal or plant." "Have you some incurable disease?" "Yes, father." "Ah, now we come to the point. What is it?" "Poverty." The priest looked at Lucien. "The diamond does not know its own value," he said, and there was an inexpressible charm, and a touch of something like irony in his smile. "None but a priest could flatter a poor man about to die," exclaimed Lucien. "You are not going to die," the Spaniard returned authoritatively. "I have heard many times of men that were robbed on the high road, but I have never yet heard of one that found a fortune there," said Lucien. "You will hear of one now," said the priest, glancing towards the carriage to measure the time still left for their walk together. "Listen to me," he continued, with his cigar between his teeth. "If you are poor, that is no reason why you should die. I need a secretary, for mine has just died at Barcelona. I am in the same position as the famous Baron Goertz, minister of Charles XII. He was travelling towards Sweden, just as I am going to Paris, and in some little town or other he chanced upon the son of a goldsmith, a young man of remarkable good looks, though they could scarcely equal yours. Baron Goertz discerned intelligence in the young man, just as I see poetry on your brow. He took him into his travelling carriage, as I shall take you very shortly, and of a boy condemned to spend his days in burnishing spoons and forks and making trinkets in some little town like Angouleme, he made a favorite, as you shall be mine. Arrived at Stockholm, he installed his secretary and overwhelmed him with work. The young man spent his nights in writing, and, like all great workers, he contracted a bad habit, a trick. He took to chewing paper. The late Monsieur de Malesherbes used to rap people over the knuckles, and he did this once, by the by, to somebody or other whose suit depended upon him. The handsome young secretary began by chewing blank paper, found it insipid for a while, and acquired a taste for manuscript as having more flavor. People did not smoke as yet in those days. At last, from flavor to flavor, he began to chew parchment and swallow it. Now, At that time a treaty was being negotiated between Russia and Sweden. The States General insisted that Charles XII. Should make peace, much as they tried in France to make Napoleon treat for peace in 1814. And the basis of these negotiations was the treaty between the two powers with regard to Finland. Goertz gave the original into his secretary's keeping. But when the time came for laying the draft before the States General, a trifling difficulty arose. The treaty was not to be found. The States General believed that the minister, pandering to the king's wishes, had taken it into his head to get rid of the document. Baron Goertz was in fact accused of this, and the secretary owned that he had eaten the treaty. He was tried and convicted and condemned to death. But you have not come to that yet, so take a cigar and smoke till we reach the calèche." Lucien took a cigar and lit it, Spanish fashion, at the priest's cigar. "He is right," he thought. "I can take my life at any time." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Ève and David by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 16. It often happens that a young man's fortunes take a turn when despair is darkest, the Spaniard continued. That is what I wished to tell you, but I preferred to prove it by a case in point. Here was the handsome young secretary lying under sentence of death, and his case the more desperate because, as he had been condemned by the States General, the king could not pardon him, but he connived at his escape. The secretary stole away in a fishing boat with a few crowns in his pocket, and reached the court of Courland with a letter of introduction from Goertz, explaining his secretary's adventures and his craze for paper. The Duke of Courland was a spendthrift. He had a steward and a pretty wife, 3 several causes of ruin. He placed the charming young stranger with his steward. If you can imagine that the sometime secretary had been cured of his depraved taste by a sentence of death, you do not know the grip that a man's failings have upon him. Let a man discover some satisfaction for himself, and the headsman will not keep him from it. How is it that the vice has this power? Is it inherent strength in the vice, or inherent weakness in human nature? Are there certain tastes that should be regarded as verging on insanity? For myself, I cannot help laughing at the moralists who try to expel such diseases by fine phrases. Well, it so fell out that the steward refused a demand for money, and the Duke, taking fright at this, called for an audit. Sheer imbecility! Nothing easier than to make out a balance sheet. The difficulty never lies there. The steward gave his secretary all the necessary documents for compiling a schedule of the civil list of Courland. He had nearly finished it when, in the dead of night, the unhappy paper-eater discovered that he was chewing up one of the Duke's discharges for a considerable sum. He had eaten half the signature. Horror seized upon him. He fled to the Duchess, flung himself at her feet, told her of his craze, and implored the aid of his sovereign lady, implored her in the middle of the night. The handsome young face made such an impression on the Duchess that she married him as soon as she was left a widow. And so, in the mid-18th century, in a land where the king at arms is king, the goldsmith's son became a prince, and something more. On the death of Catherine I, he was regent. He ruled the Empress Anne, and tried to be the Richelieu of Russia. Very well, young man, now know this. If you are handsomer than Biron, I, simple canon that I am worth more than a Baron Goertz. So get in. We will find a duchy of Courland for you in Paris, or, failing the duchy, we shall certainly find the Duchess. The Spanish priest laid a hand on Lucien's arm and literally forced him into the travelling carriage. The postilion shut the door. "Now speak, I am listening," said the canon of Toledo, to Lucien's bewilderment. "I am an old priest; you can tell me everything, there is nothing to fear. So far we have only run through our patrimony or squandered mamma's money. We have made a flitting from our creditors, and we are honor personified down to the tips of our elegant little boots. Come, confess boldly. It will be just as if you were talking to yourself." Lucien felt like that hero of an Eastern tale, the fisher who tried to drown himself in mid-ocean and sank down to find himself a king of countries under the sea. The Spanish priest seemed so really affectionate that the poet hesitated no longer. Between Angoulême and Ruffec he told the story of his whole life, omitting none of his misdeeds, and ended with the final catastrophe which he had brought about. The tale only gained in poetic charm because this was the third time he had told it in the past fortnight. Just as he made an end, they passed the house of the Rastignac family. "Young Rastignac left that place for Paris," said Lucien. "He is certainly not my equal, but he has had better luck." The Spaniard started at the name. "Oh!" he said. "Yes, that shy little place belongs to his father. As I was telling you just now, he was the lover of Madame de Nucingen, the famous banker's wife. I drifted into poetry, he was cleverer, he took the practical side." The priest stopped the caleche, and was so far curious as to walk down the little avenue that led to the house, showing more interest in the place than Lucien expected from a Spanish ecclesiastic. "Then do you know the Rastignacs?" asked Lucien. "I know everyone in Paris," said the Spaniard, taking his place again in the carriage. "And so, for want of 10 or 12,000 francs, you were about to take your life. You are a child, you know neither men nor things. A man's future is worth the value that he chooses to set upon it, and you value yours at 12,000 francs. Well, I will give more than that for you any time. As for your brother-in-law's imprisonment, it is the merest trifle. If this dear Monsieur Sechard has made a discovery, he will be a rich man some day, and a rich man has never been imprisoned for debt. You do not seem to me to be strong in history. History is of two kinds. There is the official history taught in schools, a lying compilation ad usum Delphini, and there is the secret history which deals with the real causes of events, a scandalous chronicle. Let me tell you briefly a little story which you have not heard. There was, once upon a time, a man, young and ambitious, and a priest to boot. He wanted to enter upon a political career, so he fawned on the Queen's favorite. The favorite took an interest in him, gave him the rank of minister, and a seat at the council board. One evening somebody wrote to the young aspirant, thinking to do him a service. Never do a service, by the by, unless you are asked, and told him that his benefactor's life was in danger. The king's wrath was kindled against his rival. Tomorrow, if the favorite went to the palace, he would certainly be stabbed, so said the letter. Well now, young man, what would you have done?" "I should have gone at once to warn my benefactor," Lucien exclaimed quickly. "You are indeed the child which your story reveals," said the priest. "Our man said to himself, 'If the king is resolved to go to such lengths, it is all over with my benefactor. I must receive this letter too late.' So he slept on till the favorite was stabbed." "He was a monster," said Lucien, suspecting that the priest meant to sound him. "So are all great men. This one was the Cardinal de Richelieu, and his benefactor was the Marechal d'Ancre. You really do not know your history of France, you see. Was I not right when I told you that history as taught in schools is simply a collection of facts and dates, more than doubtful in the first place, and with no bearing whatever on the gist of the matter? You are told that such a person as Jeanne d'Arc once existed. Where is the use of that? Have you never drawn your own conclusions from that fact? Never seen that if France had accepted the Angevin dynasty of the Plantagenets, the two peoples thus reunited would be ruling the world today, and the islands that now brew political storms for the continent would be French provinces? Why, have you so much as studied the means by which simple merchants, like the Medicis, became Grand Dukes of Tuscany? A poet in France is not bound to be as learned as a Benedictine, said Lucien. Well, they became Grand Dukes as Richelieu became a minister. If you had looked into history for the causes of events, instead of getting the headings by heart, you would have found precepts for your guidance in this life. These real facts, taken at random from among so many, supply you with the axiom: look upon men, and on women most of all, as your instruments, but never let them see this. If someone higher in place can be useful to you, worship him as your god, and never leave him until he has paid the price of your servility to the last farthing. In your intercourse with men, in short, be grasping and mean as a Jew. All that the Jew does for money, you must do for power. And besides all this, when a man has fallen from power, care no more for him than if he had ceased to exist. And do you ask why you must do these things? You mean to rule the world, do you not? You must begin by obeying and studying it. Scholars study books. Politicians study men and their interests and the springs of action. Society and mankind in masses are fatalists. They bow down and worship the accomplished fact. Do you know why I am giving you this little history lesson? It seems to me that your ambition is boundless. Yes, father. I saw that myself, said the priest. But at this moment you are thinking, here is this Spanish canon inventing anecdotes and straining history to prove to me that I have too much virtue. Lucien began to smile. His thoughts had been read so clearly. Very well. Let us take facts that every schoolboy knows. One day France is almost entirely overrun by the English. The king has only a single province left. Two figures arise from among the people, a poor herd girl, that very Jeanne d'Arc of whom we were speaking, and a burgher named Jacques Coeur. The girl brings the power of virginity, the strength of her arm. The burgher gives his gold, and the kingdom is saved. The maid is taken prisoner, and the king, who could have ransomed her, leaves her to be burned alive. The king allows his courtier to accuse the great burgher of capital crime, and they rob him and divide all his wealth among themselves. The spoils of an innocent man, hunted down, brought to bay, and driven into exile by the law, went to enrich 5 noble houses, and the father of the Archbishop of Bourges left the kingdom for ever without 1 sou of all his possessions in France, and no resource but moneys remitted to Arabs and Saracens in Egypt. It is open to you to say that these examples are out of date, that 3 centuries of public education have since elapsed, and that the outlines of those ages are more or less dim figures. Well, young man, do you believe in the last demigod of France, in Napoleon? One of his generals was in disgrace all through his career. Napoleon made him a marshal grudgingly, and never sent him on service if he could help it. That marshal was Kellermann. Do you know the reason of the grudge? Kellermann saved France and the first consul at Marengo by a brilliant charge. The ranks applauded under fire and in the thick of the carnage. That heroic charge was not even mentioned in the bulletin. Napoleon's coolness toward Kellerman, Fouche's fall, and Talleyrand's disgrace were all attributable to the same cause. It is the ingratitude of a Charles VII. Or a Richelieu, or— "But, father," said Lucien, "suppose that you should save my life and make my fortune, you are making the ties of gratitude somewhat slight." "Little rogue!" said the abbe, smiling as he pinched Lucien's ear with an almost royal familiarity. "If you are ungrateful to me, it will be because you are a strong man, and I shall bend before you. But you are not that just yet. As a simple 'prentice, you have tried to be master too soon, the common fault of Frenchmen of your generation. Napoleon's example has spoiled them all. You send in your resignation because you have not the pair of epaulettes that you fancied. But have you attempted to bring the full force of your will and every action of your life to bear upon your one idea?" "Alas, no." "You have been inconsistent, as the English say," smiled the canon. "What I have been matters nothing now," said Lucien, "if I can be nothing in the future." "If at the back of all your good qualities there is power, semper virens," continued the priest, not averse to show that he had a little Latin, "nothing in this world can resist you. I have taken enough of a liking for you already." Lucien smiled incredulously. "Yes," said the priest in answer to the smile, "you interest me as much as if you had been my son, and I am strong enough to afford to talk to you as openly as you have just done to me. Do you know what it is that I like about you? This: you have made a sort of tabula rasa within yourself, and are ready to hear a sermon on morality that you will hear nowhere else; for mankind in the mass are even more consummate hypocrites than any one individual can be when his interests demand a piece of acting. Most of us spend a good part of our lives in clearing our minds of the notions that sprang up unchecked during our nonage. This is called getting our experience." Lucien, listening, thought within himself, "Here is some old intriguer delighted with the chance of amusing himself on a journey. He is pleased with the idea of bringing about a change of opinion in a poor wretch on the brink of suicide, and when he is tired of his amusement, he will drop me. Still, he understands paradox, and seems to be quite a match for Blondet or Lousteau." But in spite of these sage reflections, the diplomate's poison had sunk deeply into Lucien's soul; the ground was ready to receive it, and the havoc wrought was the greater because such famous examples were cited. Lucien fell under the charm of his companion's cynical talk, and clung the more willingly to life, because he felt that this arm which drew him up from the depths was a strong one. In this respect the ecclesiastic had evidently won the day, and indeed from time to time a malicious smile bore his cynical anecdotes company. "If your system of morality at all resembles your manner of regarding history," said Lucien, "I should dearly like to know the motive of your present act of charity, for such it seems to be." "There, young man, I have come to the last head of my sermon. You will permit me to reserve it, for in that case we shall not part company to-day," said the canon, with the tact of the priest who sees that his guile has succeeded. "Very well, talk morality," said Lucien. To himself he said, "I will draw him out." "Morality begins with the law," said the priest. "If it were simply a question of religion, laws would be superfluous. Religious peoples have few laws. The laws of statecraft are above civil law. Well, do you care to know the inscription which a politician can read, written at large over your 19th century? In 1793, the French invented the idea of the sovereignty of the people, and the sovereignty of the people came to an end under the absolute ruler in the Emperor. So much for your history as a nation. Now for your private manners. Madame Tallien and Madame Beauharnais both acted alike. Napoleon married the one and made her your empress. The other he would never receive at court, princess though she was. The Sansculotte of 1793 takes the Iron Crown in 1804. The fanatical lovers of equality or death conspire 14 years afterwards with a legitimist aristocracy to bring back Louis XVIII. And that same aristocracy, lording it today in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, has done worse, has been merchant, usurer, pastry cook, farmer, and shepherd. So in France, systems political and moral have started from one point and reached another diametrically opposed, and men have expressed one kind of opinion and acted on another. There has been no consistency in national policy, nor in the conduct of individuals. You cannot be said to have any morality left. Success is the supreme justification of all actions whatsoever. The fact in itself is nothing. The impression that it makes upon others is everything. Hence, please observe a second precept. Present a fair exterior to the world, keep the seamy side of life to yourself, and turn a resplendent countenance upon others. Discretion, the motto of every ambitious man, is the watchword of our order. Take it for your own. Great men are guilty of almost as many base deeds as poor outcasts, but they are careful to do these things in shadow, and to parade their virtues in the light, or they would not be great men. Your insignificant man leaves his virtues in the shade. He publicly displays his pitiable side, and is despised accordingly. You, for instance, have hidden your titles to greatness and made a display of your worst failings. You openly took an actress for your mistress, lived with her and upon her. You were by no means to blame for this. Everybody admitted that both of you were perfectly free to do as you liked, but you ran full tilt against the ideas of the world, and the world has not shown you the consideration that is shown to those who obey the rules of the game. If you had left Coralie to this Monsieur Camusot, if you had hidden your relations with her, you might have married Madame de Bargeton. You would now be prefect of Angoulême and Marquis de Rubempre. Change your tactics. Bring your good looks, your charm, your wit, your poetry to the front. If you indulge in small, discreditable courses, let it be within four walls, and you will never again be guilty of a blot on the decorations of this great theatrical scene called society. Napoleon called this washing dirty linen at home. The corollary follows naturally on this second precept. Form is everything. Be careful to grasp the meaning of that word form. There are people who, for want of knowing better, will help themselves to money under pressure of want and take it by force. These people are called criminals, and perforce they square accounts with justice. A poor man of genius discovers some secret, some invention as good as a treasure. You lend him 3,000 francs. For that, practically, the Cointets have done. They hold your bills, and they are about to rob your brother-in-law. You torment him until he reveals or partly reveals his secret. You settle your accounts with your own conscience, and your conscience does not drag you into the assize court. The enemies of social order, beholding this contrast, take occasion to yap at justice and wax wroth in the name of the people, because, forsooth, burglars and fowl stealers are sent to the hulks, while a man who brings whole families to ruin by a fraudulent bankruptcy is let off with a few months' imprisonment. But these hypocrites know quite well that the judge who passes sentence on a thief is maintaining the barrier set between the poor and the rich, and that if that barrier were overturned, social chaos would ensue. While, in the case of the bankrupt, the man who steals an inheritance cleverly, and the banker who slaughters a business for his own benefit, money merely changes hands, that is all. Society, my son, is bound to draw those distinctions which I have pointed out for your benefit. The one great point is this: you must be a match for society. Napoleon, Richelieu, and the Medicis were a match for their generations. And as for you, you value yourself at 12,000 francs. You of this generation in France worship the golden calf. What else is the religion of your charter that will not recognize a man politically unless he owns property? What is this but the command, "Strive to be rich"? Some day, when you shall have made a fortune without breaking the law, you will be rich. You will be the Marquis de Rubempre, and you can indulge in the luxury of honor. You will be so extremely sensitive on the point of honor that no one will dare to accuse you of past shortcomings, if in the process of making your way you should happen to smirch it now and again, which I myself should never advise," he added, patting Lucien's hand. "So what must you put in that comely head of yours? Simply this, and nothing more. Propose to yourself a brilliant and conspicuous goal, and go towards it secretly. Let no one see your methods or your progress. You have behaved like a child. Be a man, be a hunter, lie in wait for your quarry in the world of Paris. Wait for your chance and your game. You need not be particular nor mindful of your dignity, as it is called. We are all of us slaves to something, to some failing of our own, or to necessity. But keep that law of laws, secrecy." "Father, you frighten me," said Lucien. "This seems to me to be a highwayman's theory." "And you are right," said the canon. "But it is no invention of mine. All parvenus reason in this way, the House of Austria and the House of France alike. You have nothing, you say? The Medicis, Richelieu, and Napoleon started from precisely your standpoint, but they, my child, considered that their prospects were worth ingratitude, treachery, and the most glaring inconsistencies. You must dare all things to gain all things. Let us discuss it. Suppose that you sit down to a game of bouillotte. Do you begin to argue over the rules of the game? There they are, you accept them. Come now, thought Lucien, he can play bouillotte. And what do? Continued the priest. Do you practice openness, that fairest of virtues? Not merely do you hide your tactics, but you do your best to make others believe that you are on the brink of ruin as soon as you are sure of winning the game. In short, you dissemble, do you not? You lie to win 4 or 5 louis d'or. What would you think of a player so generous as to proclaim that he held a hand full of trumps? Very well, the ambitious man who carries virtue's precepts into the arena, when his antagonists have left them behind, is behaving like a child. Old men of the world might say to him, as card players would say to the man who declines to take advantage of his trumps, "Monsieur, you ought not to play at bouillotte." Did you make the rules of the game of ambition? Why did I tell you to be a match for society? Because in these days society, by degrees, has usurped so many rights over the individual that the individual is compelled to act in self-defense. There is no question of laws now; their place has been taken by custom, which is to say grimacings, and forms must always be observed. Lucien started with surprise. "Ah, my child," said the priest, afraid that he had shocked Lucien's innocence, "did you expect to find the angel Gabriel in an abbe loaded with all the iniquities of the diplomacy and counter diplomacy of two kings? I am an agent between Ferdinand VII. And Louis XVIII., two kings who owe their crowns to profound combinations, let us say. I believe in God, but I have a still greater belief in our order, and our order has no belief save in temporal power. In order to strengthen and consolidate the temporal power, our order upholds the Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman Church, which is to say, the doctrines which dispose the world at large to obedience. We are the Templars of modern times. We have a doctrine of our own. Like the Templars, we have been dispersed, and for the same reasons. We are almost a match for the world. If you will enlist as a soldier, I will be your captain. Obey me as a wife obeys her husband, as a child obeys his mother, and I will guarantee that you shall be Marquis de Rubempre in less than 6 months. You shall marry into one of the proudest houses in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and some day you shall sit on a bench with peers of France. What would you have been at this moment if I had not amused you by my conversation? An undiscovered corpse in a deep bed of mud. Well and good. Now for an effort of imagination." Lucien looked curiously at his protector. "Here, in this caleche, beside the Abbe Carlos Herrera, Canon of Toledo, secret envoy from His Majesty Ferdinand VII. To His Majesty the King of France, bearer of a despatch thus worded it may be, when you have delivered me, hang all those whom I favor at this moment, more especially the bearer of this despatch, for then he can tell no tales. Well, beside this envoy sits a young man who has nothing in common with that poet recently deceased. I have fished you out of the water. I have brought you to life again. You belong to me, as the creature belongs to the Creator, as the Efrits of fairy tales belong to the genii, as the Janissary to the Sultan, as the soul to the body. I will sustain you in the way to power with a strong hand. And at the same time I promise that your life shall be a continual course of pleasure, honors, and enjoyment. You shall never want for money. You shall shine, you shall go bravely in the eyes of the world, while I, crouching in the mud, will lay a firm foundation for the brilliant edifice of your fortunes. For I love power for its own sake. I shall always rejoice in your enjoyment, forbidden to me. In short, myself shall become yourself. Well, if a day should come when this pact between man and the tempter, this agreement between the child and the diplomatist, should no longer suit your ideas, you can still look about for some quiet spot, like that pool of which you were speaking, and drown yourself. You will only be as you are now, or a little more or a little less wretched and dishonored." "This is not like the Archbishop of Granada's homily," said Lucien as they stopped to change horses. "Call this concentrated education by what name you will, my son, for you are my son. I adopt you henceforth, and shall make you my heir. It is the code of ambition. God's elect are few and far between. There is no choice, you must bury yourself in the cloister, and there you very often find the world again in miniature, or accept the code." "Perhaps it would be better not to be so wise," said Lucien, trying to fathom this terrible priest. "What?" rejoined the canon. "You begin to play before you know the rules of the game, and now you throw it up just as your chances are best, and you have a substantial godfather to back you, and you do not even care to play a return match? You do not mean to say that you have no mind to be even with those who drove you from Paris?" Lucien quivered. The sounds that rang through every nerve seemed to come from some bronze instrument, some Chinese gong. "I am only a poor priest," returned his mentor, and a grim expression, dreadful to behold, appeared for a moment on a face burned to a copper red by the sun of Spain. "I am only a poor priest. But if I had been humiliated, vexed, tormented, betrayed, and sold, as you have been, by the scoundrels of whom you have told me, I should do like an Arab of the desert. I would devote myself body and soul to vengeance. I might end by dangling from a gibbet, garroted, impaled, guillotined in your French fashion. I should not care a rap. But they should not have my head until I had crushed my enemies under my heel." Lucien was silent. He had no wish to draw the priest out any further. "Some are descended from Cain and some from Abel," the canon concluded. "I myself am of mixed blood. Cain for my enemies, Abel for my friends. Woe to him that shall awaken Cain! After all, you are a Frenchman, I am a Spaniard, and what is more, a canon." "What a Tartar!" thought Lucien, scanning the protector thus sent to him by heaven. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Eve and David by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 17. There was no sign of the Jesuit, nor even of the ecclesiastic, about the Abbe Carlos Herrera. His hands were large, he was thick-set and broad-chested, evidently he possessed the strength of a Hercules. His terrific expression was softened by benignity, assumed at will, but a complexion of impenetrable bronze inspired feelings of repulsion rather than attachment for the man. The strange diplomatist looked somewhat like a bishop, for he wore powder on his long thick hair, after the fashion of the Prince de Talleyrand. A gold cross hanging from a strip of blue ribbon with a white border indicated an ecclesiastical dignitary. The outlines beneath the black silk stockings would not have disgraced an athlete. The exquisite neatness of his clothes and person revealed an amount of care which a simple priest, and above all a Spanish priest, does not always take with his appearance. A three-cornered hat lay on the front seat of the carriage, which bore the arms of Spain. In spite of the sense of repulsion, the effect made by the man's appearance was weakened by his manner, fierce and yet winning as it was. He evidently laid himself out to please Lucien, and the winning manner became almost coaxing. Yet Lucien noticed the smallest trifles uneasily. He felt that the moment of decision had come. They had reached the second stage beyond Ruffec, and the decision meant life or death. The Spaniard's last words vibrated through many chords in his heart, and to the shame of both, it must be said that all that was worst in Lucien responded to an appeal deliberately made to his evil impulses, and the eyes that studied the poet's beautiful face had read him very clearly. Lucien beheld Paris once more. In imagination, he caught again at the reins of power let fall from his unskilled hands, and he avenged himself. The comparisons which he himself had drawn so lately between the life of Paris and life in the provinces faded from his mind, with the more painful motives for suicide. He was about to return to his natural sphere, and this time with a protector, a political intriguer unscrupulous as Cromwell. "I was alone, now there will be two of us," he told himself. And then this priest had been more and more interested as he told of his sins one after another. The man's charity had grown with the extent of his misdoings. Nothing had astonished this confessor. And yet, what could be the motive of a mover in the intrigues of kings? Lucien at first was fain to be content with the banal answer, "The Spanish are a generous race." The Spaniard is generous. Even so, the Italian is jealous and a poisoner, the Frenchman fickle, the German frank, the Jew ignoble, and the Englishman noble. Reverse these verdicts, and you shall arrive within a reasonable distance of the truth. The Jews have monopolized the gold of the world. They compose Robert the Devil, act Phèdre, sing William Tell, give commissions for pictures, and build palaces, write Reisebilder and wonderful verse. They are more powerful than ever. Their religion is accepted. They have lent money to the Holy Father himself. As for Germany, a foreigner is often asked whether he has a contract in writing, and this is in the smallest matters, so tricky are they in their dealings. In France, the spectacle of national blunders has never lacked national applause for the past 50 years. We continue to wear hats which no mortal can explain, and every change of government is made on the express condition that things shall remain exactly as they were before. England flaunts her perfidy in the face of the world, and her abominable treachery is only equaled by her greed. All the gold of 2 Indies passed through the hands of Spain, and now she has nothing left. There is no country in the world where poison is so little in request as in Italy, no country where manners are easier or more gentle. As for the Spaniard, he has traded largely on the reputation of the Moor. As the Canon of Toledo returned to the caleche, he had spoken a word to the postboy. "Drive post-haste," he said, "and there will be 3 francs for drink money for you." Then, seeing that Lucien hesitated, "Come, come," he exclaimed, and Lucien took his place again, telling himself that he meant to try the effect of the argumentum ad hominem. "Father," he began, "after pouring out, with all the coolness in the world, a series of maxims which the vulgar would consider profoundly immoral—" "And so they are," said the priest. "That is why Jesus Christ said that it must needs be that offences come, my son, and that is why the world displays such horror of offences." "A man of your stamp will not be surprised by the question which I am about to ask?" "Indeed, my son, you do not know me," said Carlos Herrera. "Do you suppose that I should engage a secretary unless I knew that I could depend upon his principles sufficiently to be sure that he would not rob me? I like you. You are as innocent in every way as a 20-year-old suicide. Your question? Why do you take an interest in me? What price do you set on my obedience? Why should you give me everything? What is your share?" The Spaniard looked at Lucien, and a smile came over his face. "Let us wait till we come to the next hill. We can walk up and talk out in the open. The back seat of a traveling carriage is not the place for confidences." They traveled in silence for some time. The rapidity of the movement seemed to increase Lucien's moral intoxication. "Here is a hill, father," he said at last, awakening from a kind of dream. "Very well, we will walk." The abbe called to the postilion to stop, and the two sprang out upon the road. "You child," said the Spaniard, taking Lucien by the arm, "have you ever thought over Otway's Venice Preserved? Did you understand the profound friendship between man and man which binds Pierre and Jaffier each to each so closely that a woman is as nothing in comparison, and all social conditions are changed? Well, so much for the poet." "So the canon knows something of the drama," thought Lucien. "Have you read Voltaire?" he asked. "I have done better," said the other. "I put his doctrine in practice." "You do not believe in God?" "Come, it is I who am the atheist, is it?" the abbe said, smiling. "Let us come to practical matters, my child," he added, putting an arm round Lucien's waist. I am 46 years old. I am the natural son of a great lord. Consequently, I have no family, and I have a heart. But learn this, carve it on that still so soft brain of yours. Man dreads to be alone, and of all kinds of isolation, inward isolation is the most appalling. The early anchorite lived with God. He dwelt in the spirit world, the most populous world of all. The miser lives in a world of imagination and fruition. His whole life and all that he is, even his sex, lies in his brain. A man's first thought, be he leper or convict, hopelessly sick or degraded, is to find another with a like fate to share it with him. He will exert the utmost that is in him, every power, all his vital energy, to satisfy that craving. It is his very life. But for that tyrannous longing, would Satan have found companions? There is a whole poem yet to be written, a first part of Paradise Lost. Milton's poem is only the apology for the revolt. It would be the Iliad of corruption, said Lucien. Well, I am alone, I live alone. If I wear the priest's habit, I have not a priest's heart. I like to devote myself to someone. That is my weakness. That is my life. That is how I came to be a priest. I am not afraid of ingratitude, and I am grateful. The Church is nothing to me. It is an idea. I am devoted to the King of Spain, but you cannot give affection to a King of Spain. He is my protector. He towers above me. I want to love my creature, to mold him, fashion him to my use, and love him as a father loves his child. I shall drive in your tilbury, my boy, enjoy your success with women, and say to myself, this fine young fellow, this Marquis de Rubempre, my creation whom I have brought into this great world, is my very self. His greatness is my doing. He speaks or is silent with my voice. He consults me in everything. The Abbe de Vermont felt thus for Marie Antoinette. He led her to the scaffold. He did not love the queen, said the priest. He only loved the Abbe de Vermont. Must I leave desolation behind me? I have money. You shall draw on me. I would do a great deal just now to rescue David Sechard, said Lucien, in the tone of one who has given up all idea of suicide. Say but one word, my son, and by tomorrow morning he shall have money enough to set him free. What, would you give me 12,000 francs? Ah, child, do you not see that we are traveling on at the rate of 4 leagues an hour? We shall dine at Poitiers before long, and there, if you decide to sign the pact, to give me a single proof of obedience, a great proof that I shall require, then the Bordeaux coach shall carry 15,000 francs to your sister. Where is the money? The Spaniard made no answer, and Lucien said within himself, there I had him, he was laughing at me. In another moment they took their places. Neither of them said a word. Silently the abbe groped in the pocket of the coach and drew out a traveller's leather pouch with 3 divisions in it. Thence he took 100 Portuguese moidores, bringing out his large hand filled with gold 3 times. "Father, I am yours," said Lucien, dazzled by the stream of gold. "Child," said the priest, and set a tender kiss on Lucien's forehead. "There is twice as much still left in the bag, besides the money for travelling expenses." "And you are travelling alone!" cried Lucien. "What is that?" asked the Spaniard. "I have more than 100,000 crowns in drafts on Paris. A diplomatist without money is in your position of this morning, a poet without a will of his own." End of chapter 17.